everybody, welcome back for another video as we're talking about the gospel. And today I want to lean into a conversation about the need for us to learn to talk to ourselves. Believe it or not, that sounds a little crazy, but it's an incredibly important skill to be aware of and learn to do, not only for you as a youth leader, but also for you to be able to help your students as they're trying to live out their faith for Christ. I want to talk about three things when it comes to the idea of learning to talk to ourselves. And the first idea is this: the nature of self-talk. I don't know if you realize this, but we are always talking to ourselves. Always. It's happening all around us. We oftentimes don't realize it, but in life, we're constantly encountering situations, facing circumstances, dealing with relationships and people, whether it's digitally and online or in person. We're always living life, other than when we're sleeping. We're living life, having interactions, going through things, and all the while we are talking to ourselves. We are telling ourselves things about what we're experiencing. We are interpreting what we're going through and telling ourselves truths that we believe about what we're experiencing and its implications on our life. And how many of you know that the two different people could go through the exact same thing, and how they interpret that experience or what they tell themselves about that experience could be totally different? I remember recently having a conversation with my friends, and we had been in a conversation with one of our other friends who had said something to us about what he was dealing with. And afterwards, I had interpreted it one way, and I called him up and I was like, "Hey man, I can't believe, what did you think about this?" And he was like, "What? That's crazy." His interpretation was literally the total opposite of mine. Why? Because we both come from different backgrounds. We both were going through different things. Maybe I was a little more sensitive at the moment than he was. We had the same conversation with the same person in the same moment, but yet we had completely different ways of talking to ourselves about that conversation. The truth is that happens all the time in life for all of us, and it happens with your students. They are, more than any other generation in all of human history, are having an inflow of information and communication into them all the time. They're almost never disconnected from hearing and seeing and being around people, even when it's digital. So what that means is that they're constantly being told messages, and they're constantly having to interpret messages and tell themselves things about what they're seeing. So imagine the average student who is spending hours and hours a day going through TikTok or Instagram or Twitter or whatever social media app will come out next week. And they're seeing things and they're witnessing things from their peers, and people are posting pictures, most of which are not real. They're fabricated and filtered, right? And they're telling themselves things like, "Oh, I wish I had that life," or "I wish I was that attractive," or "I wish I was that person," or "I hate that person because they're getting in the way of what I really want," right? They're constantly consuming information and then talking to themselves about what they think that information is saying to them. So the reality is, and we have to help our students understand this, we are always talking to ourselves. This is not a new concept we're introducing. It's simply a concept that we're trying to make aware. And the last thing I'm going to say about this is you are ministering to a generation where this is probably more important than ever. And the reason is they almost never have silence in their life. Silence is one of the key times when we can process and reflect and be intentional about our self-talk. And the problem with this generation is they almost have zero silence in their life. From the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed, they're hearing something, a screen is on, they're connected, which means the time for them to sit down and process and reflect without any voices speaking in is almost zero. So this skill is so important for this generation, and I want you to lean in for the rest of the conversation. So the number one thing is the nature of self-talk. It's always happening. The second thing I want to share with you guys is the need for self-talk. And the idea of this is self-talk is vital to guard our hearts and our minds from the negative thoughts and the negative beliefs that we often default to in life. We have to be intentional about talking to ourselves because the nature of the human heart is to believe lies and to trust in things and to tell ourselves things that are not true. So it's important to understand that and help your students understand that your default position as you're living life and interpreting the world and the information around you, your default position will be to believe and tell yourself things that are not true. It happens all the time, right? We live in a generation that's all about emotions. Whatever I feel is right and true. And we make decisions and we base our whole life on what do I feel? And oftentimes we know this to be true. Our emotions, although they're important, they often mislead us. How many times do we feel things that are not true, yet they feel true, they feel right, simply because our emotions are so powerful? Recently, I was talking with my wife, and we had gotten in a fight recently. We had reconciled, and then we were kind of talking about the nature of fighting as a spouse, and we're saying, how funny is it that in those moments of fights, it seems the emotions make things seem so real and so powerful. We made the joke, we're like, thank God you can't do divorces on demand, right? Because how many couples would immediately get divorced? Because in those moments, your emotions say things to you and make you feel like things that are actually not true. And once those emotions die down and you can get some clarity and you can remind yourself of truth, everything changes, the conversation changes, and you end up moving to a much healthier place. Well, imagine and apply that truth to your life and to students' lives in every area. All of their relationships, all of the things they think about themselves, their default will be to believe lies and to tell themselves things that aren't true. So they have to understand and recognize, I need to be intentional about the skill of speaking to myself and telling myself truth so that I can guard my heart, I can guard my mind from believing lies. The most dangerous thing in life for them is to believe things that are not true, because those things will lead them down a path of death, a path of hopelessness, a path that leads away from Christ. So the best thing to do is to remind our hearts of truth, to guard ourselves from the lies that are all around us. So I want to encourage you, a simple practical tip to have your students engage in this, and this will be incredibly difficult, but I think it's important, is to start getting them to practice moments of silence throughout their week. Have your students say, okay, you live in a crazy world where you're constantly filled with noise. The only way to self-talk oftentimes is to be silent. So what if you started with 1 minute a week, which will feel like a torture for them, right? Like 1 minute a week. Start with 1 minute a week, and maybe you can move up to 1 minute a day or 5 minutes a week, right? Start somewhere with them, but get them into the practice. And maybe even as a youth leader, one of the things that I would encourage you to do, set up a text thread with your students and text them, hey, on this day at this time, we're all gonna shut off our devices. We're going to get somewhere alone and we're going to be silent for 1 minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes and see if you can build upon that time. And during that time, encourage them to be thinking about, what are the things I'm believing in my life that are lies? How do I need to guard myself from believing those things, right? And so that's a simple practice that you can encourage your students to do. And actually, you can do it with them that will help them to start to be aware of the fact that I need to guard my heart from the lies that are all around me. The last thing I want to encourage you to do is the idea of this. There is a new kind of self-talk. See, self-talk is actually not unique to Christianity. All around you can find self-help books. You can find people that will give you a program and give you this special way, follow this and your life will be better, and I'll help you to improve yourself. Self-help is all around us, right? There's a reason why diet and exercise industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and every year in New Year's we're like, let's go, New Year's resolution, and it lasts about a week. Maybe that's just me. Right? But self-talk is all around us. People are always trying to do it. But the problem is, Christianity introduces a new kind of self-talk. See, in the world, self-talk involves you telling yourself that you're going to do better, do more, accomplish greater. You're going to move from being a failure in some area to being a success, or less of a failure to more of a success. Self-talk is all about us in the world. But in Christianity, self-talk is different. Self-talk doesn't appeal to our ability, it appeals to God's ability. It appeals to Jesus, not to us. So when we self-talk, we don't look inward and go, I've got to be better, I've got to do better, I can be better. Instead, we look outward. We look up to him and say, what has he done? What does he say? Who does he declare me to be, him to be? And that reminder is so much more powerful and important because our hope doesn't rest on our ability, it rests on his. And I don't know about you, but that's encouraging to me. I know what a failure I am in so many ways, in so many areas of my life. And if my success depends on my ability to improve and to get better, man, I can easily feel very hopeless. And many of our students do. But the beauty of self-talk with the gospel is it doesn't appeal to our abilities. It appeals to the creator of the universe, who has declared some things about us, who has rescued and redeemed us, who believes that we're so valuable and so precious, he gave up all that he had for us. And so I want to share with you four truths that I think are helpful for you to speak to your own heart, but also for you to tell your students. And these often are accompanied by four lies. So these are truths that are often ways that we can battle against the lies that we believe, right? And we can call them the 4 G's, okay? So number one, the first G is this: God is great. Oftentimes in life, we're going through circumstances where we feel out of control. We feel like we don't know what's happening. We've been going through a pandemic. Parents are getting divorced. There's turmoil in relationship. Maybe they've been victims of abuse. It could be anything. So many situations where their life feels out of control. And the lie they can tell themselves is, it's hopeless. I'll never be in control. I have nobody to count on, nothing to count on, right? That's the lie that they can speak to themselves. But the truth of the gospel is that God is great. He is in control. He's above it all. He's sovereign. He knows where we're at, and he's working and moving even when we don't see it, even when we don't believe it. So the first G is this: God is great. We need to speak that to our hearts. The second G is God is glorious. And this is a truth that we need to speak to ourselves when we start to believe the lies that there's other things that are better than him. When we start to look to other idols, other stuff, I want to chase this, I want to put my hope and trust in this. Maybe it's money, maybe it's success, maybe it's your students thinking, man, if I could just get that guy or girl to like me or to date me, right? We start to put our hope and trust in other things. We think those things are more glorious than Jesus. And we remind ourselves in those moments of the truth that God is glorious, that Jesus is so beautiful. He's more beautiful than those things because of what he's done on the cross for me, what he's done to rescue and save me. So the second G, God is glorious. The third one is this: God is good. And we really need this sometimes. When we're going through moments of suffering and pain and hurt, your students' depression and anxiety and suicide are at all-time highs. The idea that God is not good will absolutely be at the forefront of their minds. That lie will be spoken to their hearts often. And so we need to help remind them to speak this truth, that God is good. We may not understand why everything happens, but we can understand two things. God is not distant from our suffering, and he loved us so much that he has a plan to remove all suffering and all pain and all discomfort from the world. God is good. And the last one is this: God is gracious. God is gracious. And I think this truth is important because sometimes we believe the lies that God doesn't care about me. He's distant from me. He's not present in my life. He doesn't know what I'm going through. Or God's mad at me because I messed up, because I fell short. This gospel truth reminds our hearts that no. His love for you is not dependent on your behavior or your sin. He lavishes his grace on you. He right now is at the right hand of the Father advocating on your behalf because he so desperately loves you. And you didn't do anything to earn that love. You can't do anything to lose that love. God is gracious. And can I tell you, you probably know this already, but your students need to hear this truth over and over and over again. Because as they wrestle through their faith and their walk with Jesus, they will fall short, they will fail, they will mess up. And the lie that they will believe is that God hates them. We got to remind ourselves of the truth that God is gracious. So the 4 G's: God is great, God is glorious, God is good, and God is gracious. Remember to speak truth to your hearts today.